Hello and welcome to Share.care's What is Manly radio show and podcast. Men feel more lonely, lost, and not useful in society than ever in history. Males are not attaching to school, work, or women. What it means to be a man appears lost. Is there a framework for being manly that we can unearth?
Welcome to Share.care, an all-inclusive community sharing experience, strength, and hope to create strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships. Share.care communities work toward every individual feeling safe, valued, and heard, free from the threat of danger, pain, or harm. Each episode, founder Damian Andrews explores the principles underpinning Share.care and invites expert special guests to share their knowledge so you can easily reap the benefits so many others experience. You hold the choice to create your future. Let it be with strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships.
G'day, Victor. How are you?
Good. How are you, man?
Great. Yeah, continue on. The year's shaping up well. Everyone's coming out. We had the Grand Prix here recently, had the biggest crowd ever. So people are getting out and around after being locked down for a couple of years, and we're starting to creep back out of our turtle shell. Is that, how are you experiencing things over your way?
Yeah, I live in Texas, so we've been out of our turtle shell for like a year now. It's a little different than the rest of the world. But the Grand Prix, man, that's awesome. It's on my bucket list. I definitely want to go. Have you gone?
Yeah, I used to go all the time. My friend has a Grand Prix party every year, so I've been going it for over 20 years now, and we get together on a Sunday and just boys get together. Occasionally some women come, but they never come back. It's very much a boys thing, which kind of relates to what we're talking about. But I was watching the NASCAR at COTA a couple of weeks ago in Texas, which is a great track and an awesome place. I'd love to check that out one day myself as well.
Yeah, NASCAR is pretty cool, but I don't know. There's something about Formula One cars, the technology. You get more than just a left turn, so it's a little different of a race. I mean, NASCAR is pretty cool. I've been to a NASCAR race, but I've never been to F1. F1 is something that's definitely something I want to do.
It's certainly an entertainment spectacle, the Melbourne race, because it goes over 4 days and they have races every day and different types of cars and all sorts of things. They really put on a show. It's a lot.
Is that a racetrack race or a street race?
Street race. So yeah, they convert the Albert Park streets into a racetrack. Yeah,
really cool. That's the one I want to go see.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. Anyway, that relates to, for the audience too, just so you know who we're talking to, this is Victor Calabrese, and he's a technology and self-improvement speaker. He's also the author of Access Your True Potential, 4 Core Principles to Being the Best Version of You. And he's the founder and CEO of Deskside. So, pleasure to have you. Again, we've had some wonderful conversations in the past. And what we were talking about there, Grand Prix, which is kind of, motor racing, kind of seen of as a blokey thing, but relates to what we're talking about is what is manly. And from, there's a lot out there at the moment about men being lost, lonely, not knowing their place in society. What have you seen from a more, global, broader perspective? What have you seen? And we can narrow down to some specifics.
Yeah, I see the same thing. I think we're more of a global community. The last 10 years especially, I don't see much variation as long as you're in the first world and you're in the Eastern kind of mind frame. We're all the same. But yeah, I see the same thing. I see a lot of men just being lost and just kind of alone, just kind of dealing with life as it get thrown at them.
So with dealing with life, and lost, what do you think it is that has gone wrong? Is it something that men always had, or was it more the case of, if we look at it, there was typical gender roles? I'm not saying that they're right or wrong, but there was an expectation. You go out, do the work, earn the money, come home. That was a general stereotype. And the lady took care of the house and the kids, that kind of thing. And as we've moved forward, and rightly so, that with equality and that that movement, which is great, excuse me, great to see, because it should be like that. Do you think because we don't have those defined roles anymore, people are feeling a bit lost because they're not certain as to what they need to do?
Yeah, man, I think that there's a lot of confusion in the world. I am definitely old fashioned in my way of thinking. I came from that household where the man went to work, my mom stayed home and took care of us, and I kind of started my life like that.
Mm.
I believe that there was a point in society where you just needed to make more money to survive, right?
Yeah.
And at a certain point, it wasn't enough for whatever, even a C-level position or vice president, which was just not enough to give people or families that standard of living that everybody wants.
Yeah.
So at a certain point, it's like, it made sense that, we needed 2-income houses.
Yeah.
And then when you started with the 2-income housing, I mean, obviously, women can do just as much, if not more than men in any position or anything. And I do believe that. But when you got to that point, you needed both people working. That's when I think things started to get weird or started to get more affected, because I have no problem with, like, if a woman wants to be the breadwinner and the man stay home and take care of the kids, God bless you, go do it. I think that is a more feasible solution, but you can't have that these days because, again, you need those 2 incomes.
Yeah, because it was something to do with, I was reading about demographics and the nature of, because the baby boom is big, everyone come home from the war and got really excited and had lots of children. And then the baby boom is when they entered the workforce. And this is just basic economics. There was more people to work than essentially there was work. So the people, that pushed labor prices down, in a real sense. And as a result, as you say, to maintain that standard of living, people needed to go out and have both 2-income families. So from that side of things, with this feeling of lost, then, so both people have come out. Do you think maybe people have not been taught how to make decisions as to what is right for them?
I don't know. I think it's more of how you're raised. I know that, the way my dad raised me, it was a traditional man. You kind of deal with life on your own. You don't cry in public. You're not looking for help. You kind of suck it up and keep going. And I don't necessarily think that's a right or wrong way of living, but it is tough. Right. And I do see how if you don't have this like mental fortitude, you can easily get lost because, we deal with a lot of stuff. And I honestly don't think it's a man-woman thing. I think there's plenty of women. Heck, I know plenty of women that are single parents and they're doing a phenomenal job, but they're dealing with the same kind of thing. The daily stresses of life, putting food on the table, paying all the bills, taking care of all the problems. It affects us. I mean, as much as we bottle it up, little by little, it starts affecting your mental health.
Yeah, it's an interesting point that you raise, having that mental fortitude and raised with that. And there seems to be, some people have more of a resilience to be able to push forward. I remember reading or listening to a story from Wayne Dyer. He's a psychologist that used to be around a while. He's died now, but he was talking about when he was operating his practice from his home, he'd have these women turn up in their Porsches and their Gucci bags, and they'd have all these problems. And he had a neighbor, and I can't remember how many children she had, but something like 12 or, it's a ridiculous amount of children. And she was constantly doing it. And he asked her one day, and he said, why don't, you've got all these kids, you've got to do all this. How come it isn't you haven't had a mental breakdown yet? And she said, well, if I could get some of these kids out of the house, I might have time to do that, but I just don't have the time. And I was wondering, is there something in that as well with, when we look at, being busy, gives us, if we have, when obviously this lady had to be busy because she had so many kids to look after, she didn't have time to stop. And you mentioned about there, I've known a number of, certainly women that are single women that are just pushing forward constantly. And they're dealing with a lot of that and dealing with it on their own, but they seem to manage. Do you think that's part of that, having that something to do would help guys rather than, just not doing anything?
Yeah, I definitely, keeping busy is definitely a positive thing, right? Because when you're busy, your mind doesn't have a chance to kind of think through things, that negative thoughts and all that stuff. However, I will say that to me, at least from what I've learned from my journey, it's more about joy than anything else. It doesn't matter if you're busy or not busy, are you happy? And I know this may sound odd, but that lady that had the 12 kids and keeping busy, those kids have had to have brought her some sort of joy. Because if
Good
they
point.
didn't give her the joy and the happiness or the fulfillment or something, she would have eventually broken down, like we all do. And it's the
Yeah.
same thing with men. It's not so much how much can you do, how much can you take, how much stress, but what are you doing in your life that's actually fulfilling you, that's actually bringing you that joy? Because that's what fills up our batteries, right? In the book, I talk about it as 4 different wheels, and I start saying you have to have these things in your life, because those things in your life will keep your mind clear, will keep your heart pure, your spirituality, your knowledge base. You put all these things together. Yes, it's a lot of work and it's a lot of things to do, but it does more than that. It fulfills you, right? And as you have that joy, that fulfillment, you'll see that you'll be able to take on more and more.
Yeah, that's a good point, having that joy. Do you think it is to get that joy? I mean, because I look at it from men's perspective, there's a lot of, caution where people are afraid to be themselves, so to speak, because they're afraid of getting in trouble, especially in this PC world that we live in. Is it a case of, from that side of things, people are shying away from that joy because then they're afraid to say anything and they're shrinking away, do you think?
100%, 100%. I think this whole cancel culture and this fear of being too manly and feminism, being macho, all this, to me, where I was, when the way I was raised, it's all crap. Like, who cares? Just be yourself. As long as you're not hurting anybody, as long as you're being respectful, just be yourself. I'm actually, like, there was a part of me a couple years ago that I was being quiet and I was trying to be very calm, and I was scared of being myself, because I say stupid stuff all the time. I mean, my wife calls me out all the time, and it's just me being funny, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Because honestly, I don't believe half of the stuff that comes out of my mouth. But if you can't take a joke these days, that shouldn't be on us. That should be on you. And unfortunately, a lot of people just get insulted over nothing. And you really can't be that way. I mean, what the heck are you living for? Just to be always arguing and always upset?
I love that. If you can't take a joke, that's on you. Is that, I mean, because I'm drawing from Wayne Dyer again as well. It's like you can't offend someone. Someone can only be offended. And is that, what we need to be encouraging men? And I'm not saying walk around and be an arsehole. What I'm asking is just be yourself. And if someone doesn't like it, that's okay. Do we need to be encouraging men to do that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you know, it's it's really tough. I got to choose my words carefully, because I don't want to come off like it's okay for you to be a jerk,
No,
right?
and
Because that's not what I'm
not
saying,
exactly correct.
right? What I'm saying is you have to be respectful.
Mm,
Don't be a jerk. But at the same time, be yourself. If yourself is a jerk, then you got a problem
yeah,
that you got to deal with.
deal
You
with that
need
first.
something else. Yeah,
Yeah.
you got to do some self analysis and kind of go through it. And I'm telling you, sometimes you say stupid stuff, and that's okay. Be
Mm,
accepted. But you're absolutely right. You really can't insult anybody. Somebody needs to be insulted by what you're saying.
mm,
At the same time, you do have to have a filter.
mm,
President Trump was a perfect example of no filter.
yeah.
Was he in the right or wrong? Who cares? I don't even want to have that discussion. The point was the guy had no filter, and
Yes.
that's a problem.
Yeah. So it's part of this is what we're looking at from that framework of being manly. It's part of it is one, because I've spoken to a lot of women who said they want the quiet confidence in a man. The thing that they want an opinion, they want to, and someone who's going to stand up for what they believe in. And is it a case of we have that opinion, but we do it in a nice way, as you said, respect?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a, again, being raised the way I was raised,
Mm.
there was a couple things my father taught me is women want to be secure. They want to know that they have protection. There's like things that they need. And a lot of men are giving those things up because they're losing their confidence because they can't be themselves.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot of, I mean, well, from that perspective, you know, and women talk about this a lot, that they would love to have the door open for them, but don't do that anymore. And it's one of those things. Do we, from that perspective, is it a case where there's a couple of loud voices out there, but that's not the voice of the majority? Do you think?
It's a really complicated question. I play
Yeah,
this game with my wife all the time
yeah,
because she's one of those people. My wife likes to think herself as a feminist,
yeah,
and she's not. I mean, at the end of the day, I know that she likes the door open. She
mm,
likes to be taken care of. Like, she likes those things. But at the
yeah,
same time, she wants to feel independent, strong. And I think it's up to us men to let them feel that way. Like,
mm,
we shouldn't demean women, right? To the point
correct.
where we have to open the door for them. We have to do these things. Like, you have to walk a certain way. But we should give them these things. And at the same time, give them enough space for them to feel that they're valued, they're loved, and they're
Mm.
just as important as we are.
Yeah, I mean that's a distinction. I think it is. It's not that you're opening the door because the woman can't open the door. You're doing it because it's a kind gesture.
That's right.
Yeah, and that's what I'm wondering from that perspective. Is that where men need to be not jumping up and down and going, "Hey," it's just saying, "Hey, I'm doing this because I care about you." If you don't want to do it, that's fine. I won't do it. But I care about you, and I'd like to do that. I had that with someone I was a while ago I was dating. She didn't like being given flowers, and for me, it was like, I don't know if I want a relationship with someone that doesn't want flowers, and so I ended the relationship. And that was
Yeah.
my choice. It was as much as a lovely person. It was just like I don't know. It just, on some level, it didn't work for me. And is it a case where we need to do that? We need to be clear about what it is that's right. Men need to be clear about what is right for them, because planet of what's over 7 billion people, and even in wherever you are, there's a lot of people there. It's finding the right people that you connect with.
Yeah. I mean, I still open the door for
Yeah.
women, ladies. If I'm coming up to a door, I'll open it, whether it's my wife or a person out in the street. I'm raising my children to do things like that. So I do have an ingrained mentality that there's certain things you just should do.
Mm.
And I don't take it as a power trip. I don't take it as being better or anything like that. It's just something that I was taught as doing the right thing. As a man, that's what you do.
Yeah, it's a respect thing, is what I
Yeah.
was
I mean,
taught.
I've had women hold the door open for me, and that's
Yes.
okay too. I mean,
Yeah.
that's great.
Well, I hold the door open for I like, if I'm getting out of an elevator, I let everybody out first. Sometimes some people are more insistent you go first, and it's fine. I'll go then. I'm not going to sit there backwards and forwards all the time. It's just like,
Right, right,
but
right.
just as an ingrained thing, I will let other people through. It's a courteous gesture, is how I see that.
Yeah,
Um,
and Damon, what the thing that's coming to mind as we're talking through this, it's not really what we should or shouldn't do. The real problem is when there's people that take those things as being offensive. That's
mm,
really the conversation to have, because I don't think I will ever change it. I don't think my children are definitely, my boys are going to open up doors. They're going to do certain things that I'm raising them to do. But the other side of this coin that nobody's really talking about is what happens when you open the door for someone and they get offended, right?
mm,
That person, let's talk about that person. What's wrong with that situation? Why are you getting so upset that we're doing something? We're not doing anything to demean you or to make you lesser. We're doing something nice. And
mm.
that those people are the people responsible for cancel culture. They're the people responsible for this whole woke philosophy. Those are the problems that we should be talking about.
Yeah, that's an interesting point there. I'd love to see the test that you have to take to prove that you're woke. I haven't seen anything on that yet. It's just like you wake up and go, "I'm woke." It's like, prove it. Show you. If you're going to be an accountant, you've got to prove that you've got the skill. um,
I still don't know what woke is.
yeah,
Honestly, there's a new definition every day.
yeah, exactly. And that, well, this is the point I want to get to is, and I think you've raised a really, really valid point there. It's, if because as you mentioned, people open the door for you. You don't get offended and say, "Hey, I'm manly. I can open my own door. Don't open it for me."
Right.
And I look at that from that perspective of, from a man perspective as well. This need to be the macho. It's talked about as the norm is the macho man, the Arnold Schwarzenegger type thing, and I look at it because I spent time in the special forces in the SAS, and those guys there were tough. There was no, and I'm sure it's the same for in America with the Green Berets or the Navy SEALs, whatever they are, and they're really tough. And what I found interesting about that, one of the toughest guys there, he didn't look tough. He wasn't, a gym junkie or anything like that. His hobby was sewing. He took in my pants a couple of times when I lost weight. So if you didn't know that was his job, if you met him on the street, he wouldn't look, you wouldn't think of him as, a macho guy. But if he was ever in a position where he was threatened, he could hold his own very, very well, very well. And all the guys were like that. They had I mentioned quiet confidence before. They were sure of who they were. They didn't need to jump up and down and prove it. And I'm wondering from the perspective of what you're talking about, these people that are, getting offended that you're opening the door for them. Is it a case that they're actually unsure of their position because they've got to make a big noise about it? Whereas, I know I can open a door. So, and if someone opens a door for me, I'm not going to get upset about that. It's like, it's not demeaning me in any way because I know I can open the door. And is that the discussion we need to have with, well, one with, say, the people that are getting offended, but also two for guys as well. If you know who you are, then it doesn't matter what someone says. You don't have to argue back or anything like that. Just let them go on their way.
Yeah, I mean, I strive to control my emotions on a daily basis. It's one of those things that I think it's a quality that very successful people have. Many of them, I'm sure there's plenty of successful people that don't have the quality, but controlling your emotions and being able to put logic in any situation is a very important skill. That's what makes a lot of people, great, in my opinion. So, and it's the same thing. It's like something that gets you upset, right or wrong. You should have the mental fortitude again to control yourself, look at it for face value, not overreact, and then make a decision of how you're going to react, right? Instead of just, I am insulted and I am flipping off the handle, and they start screaming and yelling, and the guy was just holding the door for you, or it was something innocent, right? So it's very confusing to them because what's happening these days is a lot of stuff just doesn't make sense. So people are flying off the handle for whatever reason. Again, they're getting insulted for whatever reason. So a lot of times you don't even know why they're upset. You could be taking it for being upset for something, and it's really them being upset for something that's happening in their life. And this is just like the straw that broke the camel's back.
Is it a case from that perspective, maybe, the people that are getting upset, there's a voice of not being heard, and it's a way of allowing that out? And maybe there's, as you say, there can be a whole bunch of other issues there, and sometimes it's this emotion that's built up, and all of a sudden it's just a way of lashing out and letting that out, venting in some form. It might have nothing to do with it. I mean, we've all had that, I think, experience in our life where we've got upset at somebody, and it wasn't particularly what they did. It was a whole bunch of other pressure that we had, and that got vented on somebody else. Do you think that might be the case?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's the way you got to look at every single situation, in my opinion, right? You have to look at it like you don't know what's going on in that person's life, right? So their reaction could be just something that's happened to them over time. Somebody else may be affecting them. God knows what kind of problems they have at home. So, and you have to be cognizant of that sort of stuff so that you don't overreact yourself because of their reaction and then just escalate the situation, right? Not easy. It's something that over time you build, and you kind of have a self-awareness to yourself, and you start learning about yourself, and you start learning how to deal with those emotions. But it will serve you, whether it's at home with your wife or whether it's in the middle of the street with a stranger. learning how to deal with those situations is big.
Yeah, that relates to what we mentioned earlier, and certainly a number of women that I've talked to have very much said this from that perspective of, because they talk about men, men shouldn't have emotions, or men are taught not to have emotions. Let me say it that way. And there's this element of, okay, how do we how do we step back and control that? So is it a case of, for guys, when you look at it and go, well, because they talk about men should be able to cry and men don't ask for help. Um, where's the balance on that? Because, sometimes I know there's a lot of women that I've talked to say that, in a stressful situation, it's nice to have someone that go, hey, we're going to do this, or hey, we're going to deal with that. And they don't have to think about it. I've had a number of women specifically say that, I'd prefer it in there's certain circumstances where I prefer, hey, I'm glad when he makes the decision. And does that, again, coming back to that decision making, do we need to be teaching guys, this is how you make a decision, this is how you have an opinion? Yes, do it respectfully, but is that part of what we need to have?
So I will answer that this way. I think it's really based on every single relationship is different.
Correct,
So
yeah.
I believe that there should be one person in the relationship that can take that role, whether that's the man or the woman. That's up to your relationship and how you facilitate that, right?
Yeah.
But yes, I do believe that there's got to be someone that takes that role. A lot of times in my family, I could talk about my family because it's easier, right? It's me. There's a lot of times I take on that role. There's a lot of times I let my wife take on that role, or she takes on that role from me, right? So we have a really good dynamic to where, depending on what it is, we know who's going to take the role of that leader. I think that should be taught to all children, right?
Yeah.
It should be, whether you're a male or female, doesn't matter. I think that there is a time for emotions. I've got emotions. I'm a man.
Yeah.
I've cried. I'm a man.
Yeah.
I cry in public? No. There's no way that that's ever going to happen. But neither does my wife. So my wife is as manly as me when it comes to, if you want to put it into that perspective, right? So it's really a relationship dynamic more than anything else, having good communication, being able to take on the roles when they're necessary. But I do agree with you that there has to be someone taking on that role at any given time.
From that perspective of not, you say not crying, but when there's an issue there, it sounds like both you and your wife, but will ask, if you need to, how to ask for help as well. Or do you carry that, because I look at it from my perspective, I'm not a person that I will generally try and do things myself, but I've had a whole bunch of mentors and I think I was kind of lucky when I was younger. I played some sport with my dad. I played golf and I played lawn bowls with my dad. But then it turned out that we'd go to the events and I'd be off with other gentlemen playing with them. So if we're playing golf, I got paired up with some other guys and I'd go around the 18 holes with them, or lawn bowls. So I wasn't with my dad all the time. And I found having those male mentors around, it wasn't intentional that they were male mentors, but they were, that there was things that I could ask them for help. When especially as a young kid, I'm learning the sport or dealing with a situation, I would ask them and they would guide me. Do you think that's, knowing when to ask for help and where the safe space is to ask for help is important?
100%. So one of the things that I talk about in my book is about mentors and having mentors around you. Okay.
Yeah.
Many people, especially people that have the wrong idea of what is manly, think that they're at it alone, that they've got to just put their heads down and go. And I tell people, absolutely not. You need at least 3 mentors in your life: a spiritual mentor, a person that helps you with your business stuff, and a person that helps you with your personal stuff. These could be 3 different people. They could be 6 people, but you need that type of mentorship. I was lucky enough to have, just like yourself, I had my dad, and he was there for a lot of my personal, a lot of my business, even spiritually at times. I have a spiritual person that I go to when I need to talk about that. My wife is definitely a person that I go to when I need help personally. I have a business coach that I go to. I have all the support structure that I've built up over time. I mean, heck, if you don't have that stuff, it's going to be very likely that you're going to have some mental health issues in the future, because there is no one that I know that is strong enough to do it all alone.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I love that you've brought that up, because this is the thing that seems to be. It seems to be even they've put it as in the media. It's put out as a stereotype that men don't ask for help. But it seems when I look at the guys that I was in the special forces with, they all asked for help. They could all cry if they had an issue, if they had an emotion. Then yes, they didn't cry in public. Agree. That they didn't do that. I generally don't. Sometimes and I've been in the movie theater, and it'll be over something really ridiculous, and I'll start tearing up. But it's obviously a deep connection to me, and I'm just glad the movie theater's dark at that time. But in those moments, and this is where I was wondering from that perspective, because they say, "Oh, men have got to cry." Well, is it a case really that the narrative should be more about you need to be able to ask for help if you have that problem? You need to be able to express your emotions where appropriate. But that doesn't mean that you just fall down crying whenever you stub your toe and you go, "Oh, my life sucks," that kind of thing. And I'm being a little bit facetious with that comment, but
No, you're not, because honestly, that's one thing that I've seen is generationally. I see. I mean, I'm a Gen Xer, right? And I'm 100% on board with everything you're seeing. But I'm seeing that this other generation, this younger generation, is way weaker. And they have all these funny videos on TikTok and on YouTube where they see generationally somebody walking into a door, and the reaction that happens from the Gen Xer who just bumps into the door and nothing happens, and then you go down to the millennial, ow, and then you go down all the way to Gen Z, and the guy's on the floor crying hysterical as he knocked into the door, right? So I definitely do see that there is like an overreaction to everything. So what ends up happening is the little things, the guy, the person is crying in public, and then when the stuff is big, what's the other reaction? You're already crying in public for something so silly. What happens when something serious happens in your life? You're absolutely not ready for it. You have no coping mechanism whatsoever. So you have to kind of take things as what they are, and you do have to have some sort of mental strength. You can't be weak to everything. But there's a right time and place, I think. I mean, the other side of this whole thing too, thinking about it, is you can't bottle everything up, because that's going to be an ill effect as well. So just being, someone that shows zero emotions all the time, that's just going to blow up one day on you.
Yeah, because or not bottling things up. How do we show that for men or for boys as well? How do we find that balance of being able to, have that resilience to deal with issues, but same token too, ask for help? Is it having quality advisory people around? I mean, it's come up a couple of times where men don't have men's groups anymore. Where well, you can't. I mean, there's women's gyms, but then you can't really have a man's gym because that's sexist. Is it a case where we've lost that manly place? And I look at it. I mentioned earlier we talked about the Grand Prix. My friend has, and has for many years, had a Grand Prix party. Now it's not intentionally men only, but there has been a couple of women that have come, and to put it as a metaphor, we do grab each other's heads and fart on them. Now that's a metaphor; it doesn't physically happen, but it's that type of thing. It's very blokey. And it's not a censored conversation. It's not a derogatory conversation. There's no derogatory comments about women or anything like that. We generally don't talk about women. We're talking about other stuff. This kind of thing. And similar sort of thing with we have a poker night every now and then where we'll get together. The boys will get together. We'll play poker and we will sledge the hell out of each other, hanging shit on each other all the time. And my son got to a certain height. He wasn't. He was close to 6 foot. Early, probably about age 11, and he was with me, and my friend was having a poker night, and I said, "Well, I'm going to bring him along." And I was just wondering how he would go, because it was pretty full on, and I missed the calculation of that, or the perception of what they thought his age was, because he didn't look 11. So when we started, and all of a sudden the sledging started happening, and he got a couple of comments thrown at him, it was interesting how he just fired back. and he called someone Fat Jesus because he looked like it at the time, this big beard, and it was like that was his fire back, and everyone lost it. And that's what I'm wondering: do we need to have more of that? Have we lost some of that man interaction where we need to just go out, be men, be stupid? And so not we're sitting there having this, derogatory hang shit on women because so we don't even talk about it in the groups that I'm in. We'd talk about, fart jokes and stuff like that. And do we need more of that for men to go, hey, there's times where it's okay to just be a man?
So I don't think we've lost that. I have that. I have groups that I hang out with. My boys, my 6 and my 9-year-old, we definitely have that. When mom's not around, we're completely different than when mom's around, right? And absolutely, the fart jokes and everything else come out. And so
Yep.
I 100% am on the same page, and
Mm.
I still have that. So I don't
Yeah.
think we've lost it. The problem is that there's some people out there, some men out there that think that those things are inappropriate, right?
Mm.
So they're actually removing themselves from those interactions in order to be a better person. And
Mm.
now they lose that. And what ends up happening is they suffer the consequences of not having that group interaction. Heck, this goes the other way too. I push my wife, go out with the girls. They went to a Ricky Martin concert, 6, 8 girls. They had a blast. There was no
Mm.
guys. They went, and I'm sure they have their version of the fart jokes, right? I'm sure
Yeah.
they have their conversations. But that is something that needs to happen. And the problem isn't you or I or people like us, is
Mm.
that there's people out there that are actually taking themselves out of that equation because they have a different definition of what's right and wrong.
Mm. Is it from that perspective as well? I mean, if they don't want to do that, that's fine, but don't push it on everybody else.
Yeah, well, that's where the problem lies, right? Because now you got the minority telling the majority what to do. Because I believe we are in the majority,
Yeah.
but there's a bunch of minorities out there that not only have taken themselves out, but now they want to push their agenda onto everybody else.
I wonder about that because I've seen people talk from that perspective, and then they'll accuse other people of being a narcissist, but they're telling people it's my opinion and you should follow my opinion. And I'm like, well, isn't that the definition of what a narcissist is? It's like having total disregard for what's right for other people.
Yep, 100%.
Uh,
And I don't have a solution for it. And the only thing I could tell you is that as of 2, 3 years, I think it was right around COVID, I made the decision because the elections here in the States got really rough with Biden and Trump.
mm,
And during those times, I kind of turtle shelled.
yeah.
I started shutting my mouth, and I wouldn't give my full opinion. Sometimes I wouldn't give my opinion at all.
Mm,
And I made a decision to stop that. That's not
yeah.
who I am. And I think more of us have to be that way. Again, be respectful,
Mm.
but we shouldn't be scared to give our opinions.
Is it a case too that maybe from that perspective, we have an opinion and we can share it, but if someone's being very, because I look at that, I said from a physical perspective, when I look at the guys that I was in the SAS with, and I remember sometimes we were out, and you'd have some tough guy, mouthing off or something like that, and these guys that could take that person down easily without question, they just walked away. I went, not having the dispute, and I've looked at that from my perspective, where I've been dealing with people, and they'll have be getting quite emotional about it, and it's like, okay, I hear what you're saying, and I'll let them talk. I won't be pushing my agenda. I don't need to push my view on it. I want to understand their view, and if they're interested, then I will put my point forward. But if they're not interested, it's like, okay, now the conversation's finished and we move on. I hate it when you quote your parents, but my mum always used to say it takes two to tango, and I'm like, okay, in this circumstance, we don't need to be having it. You've got an opinion; it's not going to affect what I'm doing. I'm just going to let that go. Do we sometimes get overly emotional about something that really is not going to have a broader impact on us?
Yeah, I see where you're going at, but that's where I struggle. I
Yeah,
really do, because what I was doing is walking away from all these conversations.
yeah,
And I think that we have to stop that, because the other side's not walking away from these conversations.
mm,
And this is where the minority's voice is getting louder than the majority.
right, yeah,
And that's the problem. So I do struggle with that question. When is it appropriate to walk away? And what I will tell you is that I take it on a case-by-case basis. There is
Mm.
times where I shut up and I walk
Mhm.
away because there is nothing I can say. I could see it with that person. There is nothing I can say. This is
Mm.
not going to be a good conversation. They're not listening. The
Mm.
venue is not appropriate. I just walk away.
Yeah.
Um, but I will give my opinion more often than not these days. I
Mm.
won't follow it up. If you argue with me, I'm like, we'll have to agree to disagree, and I walk away at that point,
Yeah.
which is different than walking away on originally, right? Because at least I've stated my opinion. I've stated that I disagree with you, and then
Yeah.
I'm done. I'm not going to argue with you.
Mm.
I'm not going to escalate the situation. You've heard my opinion. You've got yours. Let's live in peace. Goodbye.
Yeah. No, I love that. What you're talking about, that's awesome. Where from that perspective, it's you've said your piece, you've shared it. If people want to have that discussion and learn from it, I think because I look at it from my perspective, going, okay, I remember years ago, people talking about, when someone's talking to you, you're busy thinking about what you're going to say as opposed to listening to what the other person says. And then after being told that, I think 5 years later, I worked out, oh, I'm actually doing that. Now I need to actually listen.
Yeah.
So from that side of things, is it from a manly perspective, and we're talking about respect, and as you mentioned respect before, is it a case like that where you have in those discussions, men, you have that, you listen, you say your piece, and if there's a potential that there's an exploration of that discussion, um, then you've got that ability to have a conversation, a civil conversation. But if the conversation is not going to be civil, that's where, as you say, you go, okay, it's not going to be civil. It's time to agree to disagree, and then take the higher road.
Yeah. I not only think that it's something that should be done, I think we have to do it because that the other side of this whole thing, and Elon Musk with Twitter has made a big case of this, right? Is we have to have conversation
Yeah,
because I could be wrong, right?
yeah,
I'm not saying I'm always right either,
mm,
right? So if we don't give ourselves the opportunity to confront somebody else's opinion, then we are going to be stuck in our opinion, which may be the wrong thing, right?
mm,
So it's really about
mm,
being able to have a conversation without emotion and with as factual as possible. Obviously, a lot of times opinions taking us back, and we don't want that. But we have to have these conversations, or how do we move forward as a society?
yeah. I love that from that perspective. What you're talking about there is we need to, and we've talked about a free society, freedom of speech, and America is very big on freedom of speech. But and from that, so we need to, as you say, you need to have those conversations. So is it a case that do we need more role models around that space? Because you mentioned the election in America, and, that Joe Biden Trump debate was, I
It was terrible. It was
lost for
absolutely
words
terrible.
how to describe that.
It's terrible. I mean, I tell you, I am a conservative, and I was disappointed in all different sides. I mean, from both sides, I was like, I just threw my hands up at a certain point, and it's like, what happened to just civil conversation using facts? I mean, I didn't know half the time who was telling the truth anymore. I go online and I read all these stories, and I don't know what the truth is anymore.
It's an interesting point that you mentioned that, because I look at that, and having dealt with a lot of legal matters and being involved with a number of legal cases, and some of the stuff, I would say a lot of the stuff I've read in affidavits and things like that, you can see that it's not true. You're just
Yeah.
reading it, go, that just doesn't, there's no way that that makes sense. Have we lost that element of honor and respect? Do you think we need to be, have we lost it? And if we, how do we bring that back?
It's a tough one, man. I definitely think that there's a lot of things we lost. Honor and respect is probably one of the bigger ones, and it's a shame because again, when I grew up, and I'm not that old. I'm 47 years old, so you're talking about the 80s and the 90s,
Hmm.
but people still did things on a handshake.
Yeah.
And these days, I wouldn't feel comfortable with any one person anymore. So we've definitely lost something. And I think the it's our leaders that are kind of pointing us in that direction because I don't trust any of our leaders. I don't
Mm.
trust any government. It's sad to see. Uh, but I don't have a solution. I'm just kind of talking out of frustration more than anything else, because I really do feel bad that I don't know what's right and wrong, or at the very least, what is true or not. Not so much right and wrong, because I do have a moral compass. I understand
Mm.
right and wrong, but I can't see the truth anymore.
But it's an interesting point that you raised that, because there was an article in one of the main publications here, one of the main news publications, written print press, well, online, but text press. There was an article about a particular misogynistic personality. Oh, so I don't want to say the person's name. I just don't want to bring that into the conversation. But very, very much in the press at that point in time. So if people want to know, you can look up the star. It'll stand out. But there was an article about that. But what was interesting about that article was there was a particular organisation here in Australia that is to support men, or boys developing into men. And they'd conducted a survey. This was the article was about, that this person, this misogynistic person, had 90-something% of the young boys had heard of him. 50% of them had agreed with certain his opinions. And the article was like that. So I decided I wanted to have a look at the research. So I contacted the organisation and said, "Can I have a look at the research?" It took 2 months. I eventually got it. And it was really interesting that it was a 50-50. There was 50% of boys did not agree with him at all. And then when you looked at the percentage of boys that did agree with him, the things that they agreed with, they agreed that he had, that he was confident, that he took care of his physical well-being. So that those are the things that they agreed with. And when you looked at his views on women, 15% of the boys agreed with his views on women. Now, the only view that was there that they agreed with, and it was the only point that was come up, was the 15% that agreed with his views on women was that, and the quote was, "Women are sometimes confusing."
Okay.
And so it was like, but from that, so that was the research. From that research, it became, there's this massive problem with young boys being influenced. And when I looked at that and go, well, this guy clearly falls into that misogynistic character. Some of the stuff is there, but the boys that actually did that agreed with him, they didn't agree with that part. They chose the selective parts. He's confident, he's strong. And to me, that showed a high level of actual intelligence to go, okay, I don't agree with those parts, but I'm taking these parts. I mean, you could have so I'm probably getting a lot of trouble for this, but when you look at a person that was really horrible in history, terrible, terrible person, was Adolf Hitler. But to say he wasn't a great orator, he was a great public speaker. He was a great influencer in the wrong direction by a long way.
Yeah, yeah.
And I just, because you mentioned about not trusting the mainstream, the media, the leaders and things like that, when that kind of stuff goes out there, and I wrote to the organisation, I said, are you going to clarify, what your research says? And they said, oh, well, actually that article is based on some earlier research. That was their response. And and that's where I wonder, from that perspective, do we need more voices of, honor out there, of saying the right thing? I know it probably doesn't get as much press, but do we need people to start leading this charge and saying, hey, this is, and having that conversation at the community level where people are going, yes, I agree with that, and allowing that to build that way, maybe.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a pendulum. The problem is going to be, because I think that it's already swinging in that direction.
Yeah.
At least here in the States, I'm starting to see some people speak up that I do agree with, but it's confusing to say the least. I mean, look at CNN's a perfect example. CNN lost like 65% of their subscribership here in the States, right? That's a
really?
huge number.
That's
Yeah.
massive, yeah.
It's a massive number. So there is definitely something going on. Everybody knows that they're full of it, right? And a lot of the things that you're saying about the publication, that the misinformation that's being put out there is also happening here. Now, I am sure it's happening on all sides of the aisle,
Mm,
but I definitely do see the pendulum swinging. The issue is, again, we have to have better voices. We have to
mm,
have voices that are less emotional, that are speaking clearly. And we have a few of those, but we also have some bad seeds that'll go out there with the right intentions, but have a bad way of presenting themselves that end up affecting us negatively.
mm,
To your point, something that's the right thing, but it's said the wrong way is going to be delivered as the wrong message. Absolutely.
mm.
So you can't be aggressive. You can't be offensive. You have to deliver these messages in a way that people will actually receive them, and then have a conversation about them, because that's the other side of this whole thing. Is you can't just deliver a message and expect it to be taken at face value, right?
Yeah.
You want people to rebuke that. You want intelligent people to have a conversation, and that's where I feel like even this election with Trump and Biden, they're two intelligent men. It's like
Mm.
I wish they could have had an intelligent conversation instead of just yelling at each other, or putting some silly things, or lying, or having these confrontations all the time. Let's have a civilized conversation about it, and let's see which way the opinion sways. How does the country actually feel?
Yeah. So do we need, from that perspective, that's an interesting point that you made. Do we need to have, for men, this whole point of again being this emotional control? So we need that, yes, if you've got emotional issues, get help, but you need a level of emotional control to sit back and actually listen. Because again, I'm using that analogy of the guys I was in the special forces with. They could sit back, they had the confidence, didn't bother them. They weren't frightened someone's going to attack them. That they had the confidence to deal with that. But I've noticed that with a lot of people, using that as a metaphor, I've noticed that with a lot of people that have strong emotional intelligence, and are confident in who they are, and I put that myself in that category, I can sit back and let people talk. And that was my only I think we talked about it before. My only resolution for this year was to listen more. And I've found, even though I was a good listener, listening more has been even more powerful. And I'm just wondering, because I was thinking about it from that, was it Nelson Mandela's dad? Apparently he was the chief of the region. And when they got together, they'd go around the room. He would always speak last. He would listen to everyone first, then he would speak. And I'm not, drawing any political allegiance here, but I remember the first, from what I was told, the first, and was a news report or something like that, some show was talking about the first time Barack Obama met with Putin. Apparently, Putin talked for 55 minutes before Obama said a word. Can you imagine anyone sitting there for that? I mean, most people couldn't sit quiet for 5 minutes, let alone 55 minutes just listening to someone. Do you think that's part of the framework we need for men, is just, hey, yes, have an opinion and be able to voice that opinion in a intelligent, controlled way without
Yeah.
attacking someone, which is a skill in itself.
Yeah,
And
I mean, that's what I was about to say. Is like, even in your special forces, that's not something that those guys came in with, right? That's something that's taught. My son's in the Air Force.
yeah,
He's in the Air Force Academy right now,
mm,
and they put you through some serious training to get you to where you're talking about, right? And
yeah,
even Barack, I mean, I didn't agree with his politics, but at the same time, I think he's a very intelligent, learned man. He knows how to present himself,
mm,
but that's all learned over time. So it's definitely something that any person can gain value from. I think it's something that we definitely lack in this country. And it would serve us way better if we can actually go back to having that type of person. Because I think, I don't know if it's something that's been phased out of life, but I saw more of that when I was younger and less as I grew up, as I grew older.
mm. Well, it's interesting. I was watching the movie The Intern last night, with I forgot his name, mental blank. But it's who is it? The actor. But he's an older guy, gentleman, and
Oh,
he
I
goes,
know what you're talking about. Yeah,
yeah,
I
yeah,
remember now. I can't remember the guy's name, but I know the movie.
yeah, and he turns up and he's there in a suit, and do we need? I mean, that
Yes.
more of, and um because I know from my perspective, there was times there where well, when I was working construction, in the sense I was contracts person and going there, I always wore a suit to the construction site. And it's interesting the power that gives you. Just the fact that it was wearing a suit, people took you that little bit more seriously. And when you said something, I mean, as long as you didn't, well, I'm thinking as long as you don't say things stupidly, but you actually, that presentation, because you said we need to present Barack Obama present himself, other people present themselves well. And I've seen, was it Jordan Peterson talk about it a little bit, where and men have gone out and actually dressed nicely, and their life has turned around a little bit. Do you think that's part of that as well? How you present yourself, not just physical clothes you wears, how you speak as well. Is that all part of it?
If you ask my business coach that, he will say 100%. He actually gets on me. I mean, I'm usually dressed like this, but I used to be in a suit every single day. And then about 10 years ago, things started changing. I honestly feel that these days that would actually have the opposite effect in a lot of places now. It's actually looked down upon if you're dressed up to go to the office or to go to some other place where people are wearing jeans and polos for the most part, right? So I don't know what kind of effect that would have if people started doing it. I think that people need to take better care of themselves and present themselves better. Is that a suit? I don't know. I think that's a little bit too much. I mean, you look at Steve Jobs. I think around the time that Steve Jobs was coming up on stage and doing his keynotes, right? That's when things started really changing, because here you have the CEO of a very large company, and he's coming out in a turtleneck and jeans, right, to do a presentation, which was unheard of at the time. And now I think that that's more commonplace. But the difference is that even Steve came out and he looked good when he came out.
That's the point. Not only that, it was a brand as well. It wasn't. He didn't come out in any turtleneck and jeans. It was always the same turtleneck and jeans.
He took a page out of Einstein's book, right? Wear the same thing every day, so you don't have any brain power going to what you're going to pick for your clothes.
Yeah, well, maybe that was part of the reason for doing it. I hadn't thought about that from that. But what I'm getting to from that point of view, even though, and I look at yourself like, you present yourself well. Even you might not be wearing a suit, but you present yourself well. That's the point I was getting to with that. Obviously, circumstances there. Do we need to have for men in that guidance? Hey, have a little bit. Take care of your health a little bit. Don't take care of your. Think about, make yourself study a little bit. I know, because it was only 40% of men go to university now, which is kind of. I read a report recently that there's been a compass shift as far as finding, if you go from equality of numbers in a workforce, at the higher educated part of it, it's spun the other way, where they can't find the men because they're not educated.
Yeah, well, that's going to be a huge problem in the next couple of years as artificial intelligence starts taking over more and more of the remedial work. If you don't have an education that could push you up into that next level, you're not going to have a job. You're not going to be able to do anything, right? Because the whole point of technology taking over the lower end jobs is that so you could put humanity on a different level, right? But in order to be at that level, you need a certain level of education.
How do you get guys to want to study? Is it, because it seems to be, are we missing some sort of motivation to do that? I know a lot of effort went into women and education in that space. And my stepdaughter's school, when we looked at that school, it was a fairly high-end private school, but the amount of work that they went into as to how girls learned, they set up the classroom so they were a circle. The tables were circled because girls like to have more of interaction, conversation. So they actually set the classrooms up in that way so they could learn in that way. Do we need more of that from a man perspective of how men learn? Because we like to be more combative. We want to have that, those arguments, so to speak. We're not as compliant. So do we need more? It's not the right word, authoritarian, but do we need more structure with that? I know with my son, I have a very, in a way, a rigid structure, but a flexible structure. So if he does, there were certain rules, and they were the rules. It wasn't a debate. It wasn't a question as to why those rules were there. They were the rules. That was it. And but within that, we could have discussion about it, about things, and that kind of stuff. Do we need to have more of that for men, education for men, to encourage them to move forward?
So I think the entire educational system needs to be thrown out and redone, because I really do feel that the education system is stuck at building factory workers. And that's why a lot of men, or a lot of people in general, just don't like or start walking away from it, right? Because they don't want that kind of education. The best education, because we all learn differently. We all have different personality. Like for instance, I'm an auditory learner. Anything that I hear, I remember. And a lot of times, I went through college and high school and my MBA. Everything was listening to my lectures. I barely read anything. I barely did any of the other work, but I just listened. And as long as I listened, I was a great 3.3 student. If I did a little more work, 3.6, I was up there for doing very little work, because I have this gift. The thing is that we have to make education very flexible, so that people get what they need when they need out of it, and not so rigid as to just pull out all the same type of person at the end of the road, right? So I do feel I am very vexed by the whole educational system. I think it's a tremendous waste of money. I learned more after college than I did in college. College just gave me a lot of useless information, as far as I'm concerned. I think after like third year of high school, I got all the basic that I could, and then it was just repetitive, build on that basic, but it was nothing that I used. I have a chemistry degree, and I own technology companies. So one has nothing to do with the other, right? My MBA served me well, but that's because that was purpose. I wanted to own companies. I wanted to be in business. I wanted to understand. But again, that MBA gave me a lot of information. And the experience that I gained over time was way more valuable. So I really think that education has to be rethought from people that are way smarter than me, people that understand how people learn, and we should really restructure everything.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Because from that learning perspective, it's so important from a guy perspective, because we are not, the research shows that only 40% of guys are getting higher education. And as you say, as those remedial jobs get phased out by machines, and which has always been the case. When you look at, a lot of the work that happened 100 years ago in the manual labor type things, a lot of that doesn't. You don't have a whole bunch of men digging trenches anymore. You use an excavator. It's kind of, and that's going to continue to happen. I was just wondering, from that perspective of, how do you encourage a guy to want to learn, even from your perspective? As you say, you didn't do, the chemistry probably didn't serve you well. They say, learning through, doing that, it's developing that discipline. Is that more where we need to be having that focus on the education for guys as well, having that discipline? Even with my son, I mean, I taught him. I said to him, if you come home from school and you review the work that you've done in the school, that'll stick in the way your mind works. That'll stick in. I didn't tell him he had to do it. I just said it'll make your exam study easier because you've just reviewed that. And I noticed he started doing that. And then I noticed he stopped doing that. So when he come home, he wasn't doing that study anymore. And I said, "Oh, are you still reviewing? Do you not see that anymore?" And he goes, No, Dad, I just worked out that if I do it at school, I don't have to do it at home. I've got more time for myself."
Yeah.
During the free periods at school.
Yeah. So let me highlight something that you did, because it's going to base my answer.
Yep.
You as the father are the principal teacher.
Mm.
You as the father are the reason why your son is now doing the things that are helping him do better. So my answer to your question is, the problem is the family. It's the home life, right? Because I do the same thing. I spend my days, every time I interact with my boys and my other children, I spend my days just teaching and teaching and teaching. And it could be, and my kids are very curious because I nurtured that in them, right? Ask me a question, bother me, ask me when you see something that looks weird. Why is that happening? And I answer their curiosity. And
Mm.
I think as long as you do that, you will nurture a person that wants to learn. Now, how they learn, it could be university, it could be
Mm.
through experience, it could be through a multitude of ways. But the important thing is that you nurture that curiosity in them.
Yeah. Is that part of that too? I mean, I love that nurturing this because that's what I've done with my son. And is it also to how you go about it? Because I know, using another example, or two examples, I liked video games when I was a kid, so it's hard for me to say don't play video games to him. But from that side of things, there was one time we were playing a video game. We had a racing game, got a simulator, sit in the thing and drive it like a real car. And we were playing that, and he had a shocking race. And I could see as he was driving, he was getting more and more upset, more and more emotional, and he was just messing it up more. And he finished, and you could see he was just in that emotional sucked. And I think he was probably 7 or 8 at that time. And so it was my turn to jump on. And I said, no, you get back on there and you will do it again. And you're not, because he wanted to leave the room. And it's like, no, you're not. You will get back on there and you'll do this again. And this is what you'll do. You'll focus forward. You'll focus on where you go. You stay calm. And that's how you're going to do it. And he did it. And he had the best race he'd ever had.
Yep.
And I said to him after he finished, I said, what did you learn from that? And he goes, I don't give up. Just keep going. And I went, okay, that's what you've taken away from that. And another example of that was, again, video game related. He was telling me about how he'd spent 9 hours to get this big boss on this video game. So he spent 9 hours playing a video game with it. Yeah, and so I went and I said, wow, you've got some real commitment and determination that's going to serve you well in later in life to achieve your objectives. That's how I framed it from that perspective. Do you think, again, as in the home, we need to be framing things from a perspective that encourages and inspires them, and that has to be at home, not left to the schools?
Absolutely. I mean, if you leave it to the schools, you will definitely do them a disservice, because a lot of first of all, there is no one they trust more than your parents, right? I mean, they have great teachers. I'm sure the teachers doing everything, but they're not their parents. The other thing is you have opportunities at home that teachers don't have. Teachers have a limited amount of time with 20, 30, 40 kids in the same room. They don't have the same ability to nurture these kids the way a parent does. I mean, I use video games too, and every single opportunity I get, I try to teach them life lessons. The way I do it, for instance, with their video games is my children aren't allowed to play any electronics unless they have a bank of time that they've saved up. And the way they get bank of time is I have a book, which they self-monitor, but they make their beds, they wake up on time, they do their hair, they do that, and they start adding time, which they accumulate, and then they could use it for their iPad or for their Xbox or for whatever they want to do. What am I teaching them there? Well, I'm teaching them to save money. I'm teaching them that they have to save in order to spend, right? I'm teaching them that there is things you have to do in life in order to get the things you want to do in life. Those are opportunities that teachers at schools will never be able to do. They can't teach them these things. And these are things that are really, really important life lessons that a lot of times are left to children learning on their own. A lot of parents aren't doing this stuff.
Yeah. Do you think it's important from that perspective as well? I mean, because I love that framework where you've got this bank of time and you're teaching them skills that actually cross-reference to each other as well. So this banking time is also, as you say, banking money in a way. If it's that same principle that applies. There's a whole bunch of discipline and forward thinking there as well. Delaying gratification, all that kind of stuff. Because you mentioned making beds as well. I don't know where that came from. My son makes his bed. I never insisted. He never used to. And now I've noticed he's when he gets up in the morning, it's not made perfectly neatly. It's certainly to the standard I had to do it when I was a kid. I went to the army and I could make my bed army standard by the time I got there because that's how my mum was. But from that side of things, is it as well as that, do we need to encourage them to be because I'm coming back to this making decision for yourself. There was a set stereotypical expectation, and as you said, and you said about friends of yours that have different the guy goes stays at home, the girl goes out to work. I've got friends very much like that. I've got friends who are, they're very distinct roles within their relationship. There's one particular friend, I know if I'm going to ask him to catch up somewhere, he's going to check with his wife first to see what the calendar is, before he'll never say it in the spot. I always ask him, he goes, hang on a minute, I've got to check with the boss first. Because she controls the calendar, and they know what their roles are. And so I was wondering, from that perspective, do we need to be, encouraging young boys, at the home would be great, but even broader perspective, it's okay to be you. My son and I, when the June movie came out a couple of years ago, we kind of laughed at a scene in that, because they were talking about, there was the son and the father talking, and it was whether the son was going to take the role of, the royal role, and the father turned to the son and said, whatever you choose to do is up to you. You're already everything you need to be for me. You're my son, and that's it. And we kind of laugh, because I've said that to my son all the time. It's like, whatever you do, and I say it facetiously. I say, if you screw it up, you can't blame me. Then it's like, that's what you choose.
Yeah.
Do we need to be encouraging them to make their own decision? It's okay to do what they need to do. Is that part of what we're missing?
Yeah, I do that with all five of my children. It's tough, but parents have to realize that children are on their own path, and we can help them and guide them. But at the end of the day, we shouldn't stop them from making decisions unless it's something, really stupid and hurtful. And I do that with all my kids. Like, even the simple things, I make sure that my kids wake up on their own in the morning, right? I am not big in my wife going upstairs and waking them up. They need to have consequences to not being able to get to school on time, right?
Yeah.
But they need to learn that early on. And the only way us as parents can reinforce that is to give them enough freedom to make their own choices. And then we've got to be there to pick them up if they make the wrong choice, especially as they get older. When they're younger, not so much so. But, I've got a 21-year-old, I got a 19-year-old. At a certain point, you can't make decisions for them. They have to make their own choices. And then when they get in trouble, they have to know that they could pick up the phone and they could call you, and you'll be there to, at the very least, listen to them. And then whether you help them or not is a totally different story.
That's an interesting point that you raised there about being there to listen. And I count myself as very fortunate. There was a period where I had to ask I needed help, and to ask my dad financial help, and to ask my dad for financial help was probably one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. To go to my dad and say, "Hey, Dad, I need some help here." And I was fortunate that he did listen, and he was in a position to help as well. But do we need to also be able to let them fall as well? Because there's been time, especially when my son was little, there was a couple of things I'd said, don't do this, or it's going to, I can't remember specifically what it was. He wasn't going to get physically hurt. That's what it was. He had this grading it was one of his first belts for his karate, which he's now got his black belt. He got it a few weeks ago, which is cool. But
wow, cool.
Yeah, it's really cool. But one of the early ones, he wasn't. I was encouraging to study. I wasn't to practice, but he wasn't, and I didn't push him. And I'm going to let this go. And I asked him about wanting to go, and he knew the grading was coming up, but he didn't do the work. And he went into and the sensei talked about it. I said, no, let him do it. Let him fail, because he hasn't done the work. And so he did, and all the other people got their next belt. I think it was the first one. It was the yellow belt or whatever. Yeah, it was one of the early ones anyway. They all got it, and he didn't. Yeah. And he was. We talked about it afterwards. We didn't have this long conversation. We had a man conversation. I'm going to say it was it was very few words, but it was. I was basically, we were sitting in the car driving home. I said, "How did that feel?" And he goes, "I hated it."
Good.
Yeah. And do we need to be, for men, do we need to be able to, because there seems to be this thing of everyone gets a participation trophy, all that kind of stuff.
You were reading my mind. I'm like, that participation, if anybody gives my kids a participation trophy, I'm going to grab it and throw it in the garbage. Right. Yeah. I mean, I push my kids to be number one. And it's okay if you're not, that's really where you have to make sure that they're okay with not being number one, but striving for that number one, is something that's really important. You got to let them fail. My oldest daughter, terrible with money,
Mm.
terrible. I made her go to college on her own. She had to pay for it herself. She's doing everything on her own. She's got a job. She's paying for her apartment. It's not that I can't help her. It's that I think she needs that life lesson, because
Mm.
when she's out and I'm not around anymore, right? And
Mm.
she's out there, I hope that I've taught her out of that bad financial decision mode, and she's better with her money because
Mm.
of what I'm doing with her. And she's come to me and she says, Dad, I'm in trouble. I need some money. And I says, well, what are we going to do about that? Right? I'll help her, but she's going to have to suffer for me helping her, because it's not because I'm trying to be mean to her. It's
Mm.
because she needs to learn. And it's really something that I think a lot of people don't let their kids fail enough. And then that whole, it's okay if you're number two, it's okay. I mean, it is okay, but at the same time, you also have to
Sucks. I hate being
strive for
number
that best.
two. That's why I like NASCAR, because you only get a first place trophy. You don't get, there's no second or third
I'm
place.
right. I'm right there with you. I mean, I'm a little too much. I do it with my kids, and luckily I have kids that have the same mentality of me, so it's okay. I could play with them. They don't get upset when they lose. But a lot of times, my son will come to me, look, Dad, I got a 90 on a test, right? And I'm like, what happened to the other 10 points? It's like, what do you mean? I got a 90. It's like, well, I'm proud of you, but there's 10 points missing here. So I do that sort of stuff with them.
Yeah.
And they're okay with it. And that's the kind of kids that I want to raise. I don't want kids that are okay with being mediocre and with a participation trophy. I don't want that.
Is it that this whole thing that it's okay to fail? Because I don't, friends will tell, if you speak to them, that they'll say I'm probably one of the most competitive people out there. I related to Richard Gere in Pretty Woman saying I invented the concept of wanting more. It's like everything more. But the point with that, and I think you raised here, is it's okay to fail. I'm okay with failing. It pushes me to want to do better. It's like, okay, I didn't get that. Now, how do is that the discussion we need to be having? It's okay to fail. It's not, you still want to, it's a balance, isn't it? You got to be okay, because not everyone can win at the same time. And that's what pushes you. It's like, okay, like my son, when he had that shitty video game, it's like, you had a shitty experience. What did you learn from it? Get out there and give it another go. Is that what we need to be teaching people?
Yeah, it's bringing back. I just finished a book called Mindset, and it goes into the fixed mindset as compared to the growth mindset, right?
Mm.
And the real big difference between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset is that people that have a growth mindset are okay with failure. They take failure as just something that's teaching them what not to do, something that's teaching them a lesson of some sort, and they keep pushing forward. And that's really what you're talking about, is making sure that your kids learn to be in a growth mindset. Because in a fixed mindset, you think you're the best at what you do, and if you fail, the world ends. It's like, oh my God, I am not that good, and you get depressed and you start going down the other road, right? And with a growth mindset, you're always pushing for that more. Now, I naturally have a growth mindset. My kids are definitely getting that at the home. But yeah, heck, if I didn't fail a million times, I wouldn't have my 10 successes. It's just the nature of the beast. You have to fail, or come close to failing and then succeed. And what better success than getting so close to failing and then pulling it out? I mean, that's the greatest feeling in life. I mean, ask Elon Musk. How many times has he come so close to losing every single cent in his bank account? And look at him. He's one of the wealthiest men in the world.
Yeah.
So, that's the kind of stuff that kids these days, I don't think, are learning.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because I was lucky when I was in the army. There was a guy there. I don't know if I told this story before, but he was a reasonably good looking guy, but he was dumb as dog shit. But he was always dating these amazing women. They were gorgeous, they were intelligent, they were kind of doctors and lawyers and stuff like that. And we're looking at, my friends and I are looking at how, we were thinking, he must be packing something lower. That that was Yeah, boy discussion. And so but one day I asked him, I said, Shane, and I literally said this, you're not that bright. How is it that you're dating all these great women? And he turned into this Obi-Wan type character, put his arm around my shoulder and said, Damien, what you don't see is I ask a lot. Most of them say no. You just see the ones that say yes. And for me, that was a real life lesson. And so I'm wondering, do we need to have that more of that conversation with guys, in the way that we've just talked about it for guys, because we can relate to that, and saying, hey, it's a numbers game. Whatever it is you're doing, it's not the failure. Yes, take the failure on board and go, well, okay, how can I be better? And give it another go. How can I be better? Give it another go.
That's the key. The key is what you just said, right?
Mm.
I don't want everybody to think that it's just okay to fail and just to keep failing. It's
No.
okay to fail if you learn from the failure, right?
Mm.
So fail, learn, try again. Fail, learn, try again. If you're failing just to fail, then you're not gonna do much in life, right? But if you're learning from your failures, then yeah, you're gonna be something great.
And is it a case too of recognizing, sometimes the circumstances are just not going to be favorable? It's got nothing to do with your skill. It becomes a numbers game. I look at it from a poker night with my friends. There's an element of luck there. As much you can be really, really skillful, but there's an element of luck. And also too, from the perspective of how we play, sometimes it's just ridiculous where people just go all in to just just because. Especially when your head's up, it's like, all right, all in, and so there's the element of how the cards are going to fall, and we need to have that in that conversation as well. Going, part of this failure is sometimes shit happens. It's just the way it is, and you just need to go, okay, I'm going to learn how I could do it better, but sometimes I've got to accept, no matter how well I play, sometimes it's going to be just bad luck.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, I have, I'm in the startup world. I've seen so many startups, and I can tell you that there have been so many startups that were brilliant. Absolutely. Some were mine, some were other people, but they were brilliant, and they failed. And they failed because of economics. They failed because of finances. They failed because of inexperience. There's so many reasons why things fail. And sometimes it's just not meant to be. That's the other side of this whole coin, is you have to be okay with whatever your life is and be happy with whatever your life is, right? Always strive to make it better.
Yeah.
But you have to understand that it is what it is.
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned that, because you've heard of Eric Bana. He's an actor. Before he had a TV show here in Australia. It was a little comedy show. It was very funny, but it got cancelled, not because for reasons outside of. And I remember I can't remember who was it. I think it was one of the senior execs of the TV station at the time. There was a discussion about this much later. They said, look, you're going to be, go on to do great things. This is outside of your control. There's, for reasons, it's not got nothing to do with the show. It's not going to be on anymore. And that was a setback, obviously, for his career, because he didn't have that anymore. But then, Eric Bana's gone on to do what he's gone on to do, because he just kept going at it. How do you teach that? Again, is it something that's home taught, or is it having the right mentors around you?
I mean, initially it's home taught. I 100%. I mean, you can't console your kids too much, right? Give them a shoulder to cry on, and then kick them in the ass and say, okay, let's go. That's the kind of philosophy that I take with the kids. I think there's a lot of parents that are just trying to make sure that their kids are never crying and they're never hurting. But, pain is such a great teacher. And I'm not saying that I like to see them that way, but I know it's a necessary evil. I went through it. I mean, as you think about it, when you're a kid, how many times did you sit in a corner just, devastated because of something that happens? That shaped my character. There was, oh man, I think it was a prince in Dubai. I'm going to butcher this, but he was asked something similar, right? And he said to the guy that was interviewing him, I drive a Rolls Royce. My father drove a BMW. My grandfather drove a Ford. My great-grandfather had nothing. My kids are probably going to have Lamborghinis. Their kids are probably going to have Mercedes. Their kids are probably going to have Fords, and their kids are probably going to have nothing. It's just the cycle of life, because when you have so
Mm.
much, you end up not striving for more. When you
Mm.
have little, you strive for everything you can. You work every hour.
Mm.
You go learn everything you can. And that's where the kids have to understand that. So, like, I make a good living. They have a great life at home, right? But
Mm.
they can't take that stuff for granted, because what ends up happening is then they're not going to work as hard as the kid that has nothing, right? And the kid that
Mm.
has nothing is going to be the one that's going to be in the house that I live in now, and they're going to be in the house that, that the kid had nothing. So you have to always strive for more, and the only way to teach that is to make them hurt a little.
Is that part of, because someone said to me recently, they said you learn from pain until you learn to learn from joy. And because I'm putting that in the context of, because similar sort of thing for me, it was, I had to strive and now a lot of things like that come easy. And we talked about beforehand, I'm taking on a role as a CEO of a radio station, but that's not a paid role. So I'm doing and we mentioned, I think in the pre-show, we talked about some of the board characteristics and things like that aren't conducive to how you would normally expect that to be. So I put myself in a situation that's voluntarily put myself in a situation that's created all this extra angst that I don't need in my life. I'm not getting paid for it. It's not. I mean, there's other reasons that are driving me to do that. There's reasons of helping other people, of giving back, of making, and the connections through that of so many people in the short period that I've been doing that have actually helped them be better. Is that something that we can take that to that next level? And maybe I've watched too much Star Trek, where you've got this thing where it's about personal accomplishment as opposed to how much money's in your bank or this striving. Because I know from my perspective, I don't have to work that hard to have a comfortable life. I don't have to. I can.
Yeah, I don't necessarily. I think about it that there's more than one way to pay someone.
Yeah.
And that's where I think this particular thing that you're getting paid. It's just not with dollars, right?
Yeah.
You're getting paid in other ways. So there's always something that someone does because of something,
Yeah.
whether that's financial gain or relationships or meeting people or titles. So there's a bunch of reasons and a bunch of ways to pay for someone. But I do feel that, going back to the original question, you can definitely learn from joy,
Mm.
but I don't think you can learn from joy if joy's the only thing you've ever felt. I think it's going to be
Mm.
really hard, because you need the contrast. And
Yes.
I can't see you, like, how do you know what good is if you don't know what evil is, right? You need that contrast, and
Mm.
learning from experience gives you that contrast. I mean, that's what life is all
Yeah.
about, is
Yeah.
going out there and just hitting your head. I mean, if you don't hit your head and you just got a straight shot to wherever you go, which I guess there's some people that have that and
Yeah.
are extremely lucky, how much have they really learned?
Yeah. And I guess I underestimate that a little bit too in my life, because if you look at my life now, it's, and friends that know me have said this to me. They go, I don't know how you are alive. Some of the crap that I've been through in my life.
Yeah, you see?
And
That's exactly what I'm talking about.
and and man, maybe that's coloring that a little bit from my perspective, because I look at it and now I'm just really grateful to be able to help and contribute in a way. But maybe it is because of those those dark times that have gone through. And I'm just wondering, from a man perspective, is that how do you relay that to somebody? Because I look at it from my son's perspective. Obviously he had that experience with the karate grading, where he went through some trauma, and trauma is relative. I get that. I mean, from him as a young kid being in this place where he's really embarrassed by that, and maybe that at a young age that's had an impact on him. But I wonder about that from his perspective, because I look at it. We mentioned money before, and for his grading, I mean, he didn't know he was getting this, but when he got his grading, I said, "Oh, I'm going to give you $1,000, because you've worked at this for years." So I put it in that contrast, and it's a big achievement. You can walk around saying you're a black belt now. I mean, it's very different to say you're a black belt to saying you're a brown belt. Two different things, completely different stigma attached to it. But what he turned to me, I said, "What do you want to do with that?" And he goes, "Because I have money for him in an investment, a private equity fund." And he goes, "I'll put 750 in the equity fund and give me 250."
That's awesome. That's
yeah.
fantastic. Yeah.
I was like, and I know
Well,
that 250 is going to sit in his wallet until one day, but because every now he pulls out this money, and it's like he's just saved it from wherever, and I'm not sure, I've lost where I was going there with that, but with this shaping men of being men, he's confident in who he is. The teachers have said that when I have the parent, you have the parent teacher interviews, they said he walks his own quiet path. He knows where he's going. He's happy about that. He doesn't have to try and impress other people. So I'm wondering, from that perspective, is that something that lasts? Is it something that once you've got that character, that it kind of stays? Or like you said, there'll be a point in time where he'll, drop down. Is that something that stays, do you think, or is it?
no, I don't think so. I think life is a bunch of ebbs and flows, and
Yeah.
you kind of go through life, and depending how you take it, and that's why I think that, at least from what I've learned from my personal experience, having that growth mindset, or having that ability to understand what a failure is and frame it as what it is
Mm.
really important, because nothing sticks. I mean,
Yeah.
nothing that you stop working at remains the same, right?
Mm.
You have to keep putting energy into anything, relationships, yourself. I mean, the minute you stop learning, you start dying. And I
Mm.
think mentally, you just start decaying. The minute you stop exercising or moving, your muscle starts degrading. So everything in life is about, where do you put that energy? And as long as
Mm.
you're putting energy in the right places, you get great results. You start putting energy in the wrong places, and you get those results.
Mm.
So I think the most important thing we could teach our children is that nothing stays the same, that you have to keep fighting, and that failing is okay.
So you talked about putting energy in the right places. Um, is that connected to having a purpose? Do we need to know what our purpose is, or can we choose our purpose?
So I think that finding your purpose and having a purpose is a result of putting energy into the right things. I struggled with finding my purpose for years, and a lot of it was because I wasn't doing all the right stuff. And it's going back to the book and accessing your true potential. That's what I talk a lot about. Is, this book's dedicated to finding your purpose. Well, you can't really find your purpose if you're not the person that is meant to do that purpose, right?
Mm.
Whatever that purpose is, like, I'll give you something extreme, so I can kind of frame it. If your purpose is to be a bodybuilder, then
Mm.
you better be eating right. You better be doing your meditations. You better be going to the gym. Like, there's all these things you have to do, or you're never going to achieve that purpose, right?
Mm.
If your purpose is to help, give me a charity, right? Then you better have the financial backing to be able to help that charity, right?
Yeah.
If your purpose is writing a book, well, you better have the knowledge base necessary to writing that book. So to
Mm.
me, it's more about, put these things in your life that give you the true person that's inside, right?
Mhm.
Once you have access to that true person, your purpose will kind of come out on its own.
Okay, so from that, if I'm hearing that right, is it a case of just getting out there and doing something, and through that process of actually doing something, you're actually going to find that, as opposed to going to a retreat somewhere for 6 weeks to try and work out who you are.
Yeah, exactly. You need to do the right things in your life to be the best version of yourself. Once you become the best version of yourself, your purpose will come to the surface. Because if you have the wrong relationships, then you're probably not going to find your purpose. If you're not spiritually sound, you're probably not going to find your purpose, right? If you're not healthy, you're going to be
Mm.
busy with the doctors. You're going to be busy with other things that
Mm.
are going to be taking up your time. You're not going to find your purpose. So stop looking so much for your purpose. You know what you like to do. If you like to draw, or you like music, or you know what you like to do.
Mm.
Do things to make yourself the best version of yourself. Follow the things you like, and then that purpose will kind of follow. You find you.
Is that, I mean, because that's an interesting, when you're talking about doing the right things, how does someone know what the right things are?
So that's the whole point to the book is there's a lot of right things to do, right? You
Yeah.
have to have a lot of, and a lot of successful people are doing these things, and there's a lot of books dedicated to it. Miracle Morning does a really good job of giving you like the things that you should put in your morning to have the greatest start. Atomic Habits gives you a great suggestions of how to put these habits and building on them in order to have these great habits in your life. So, when I wrote Accessing Your True Potential, I started putting all these pieces together from all the books that I read because there's a lot of stuff you should be doing. Eating healthy, nutrition, spirituality, effective routines, increasing
Mm,
your knowledge base. Those are all things that, and I expand on all of them, but those are all things that you really need to have in your life in order for you to then be that best version of you.
yeah, I get where you're coming from there, because what you're talking about is there's some high level principles of, if you follow those principles, then the rest will fall into place, if I'm hearing that correctly.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, even achieving a black belt, I used to study Taekwondo, and I know the amount of things. It's not about punching and kicking. There's a lot of that in there, but it's not only about punching and kicking. There's a lot of aspects to becoming a black belt. That's why, for a person that understands, the achievement of getting that black belt is huge. There
Mm,
is a lot of mental and character and physical all blended in together to actually achieving that goal.
yeah. It was interesting too. The sensei said to me the week beforehand, he wasn't getting it. They said there was something that he did during that week that pushed him across the line to, so whatever and he did it on his own. I didn't know that. The sensei told me afterwards. But you're right. There's all these elements there, and that's what I wonder about from life. To me, I find now, and maybe it's through the pain that I've gone through, that life is pretty easy if you follow those key principles. If you do the right things, life is actually, yes, doesn't mean there's not effort in there. It doesn't mean everything's going to go smoothly. But if you do the right things, all of a sudden things just seem to fall into place at some point in time. You've just got to be
Yep.
a little bit patient. Is that
Yep.
what we need to be
I would
teaching
say,
guys?
yeah, absolutely. And the other thing that I would add to that is to try to stay in the now. Don't be thinking too much
Mm,
about the past. Don't be thinking too much about the future. I tell everybody, if your mind is stuck in the past, you're probably going to get depressed, and if your mind is stuck in the future, you're probably going to get very anxious. So
mm,
it's really important to stay in the now. And a lot of times when there's a lot going on, and you got all these stresses, all these financial things going on, I kind of just think to myself, well, right now, there's nothing going on. I'm having a
mm,
conversation with my friend Dave, and it's okay. Everything else is fine. And that's kind of the another thing that I try to teach the boys. They're a little young for that still.
mm.
Um, they're too young to start thinking about what it is, the difference between past, future, and now. But yeah, staying in the now is really, really important. It's something that I learned too late in my life, unfortunately.
Yeah, and it's so. I mean, that really makes a big difference, because I noticed that with a couple of things I've had recently, there was, I could have got stressed about it and worried about it, and I didn't. I just went okay, and I had the conversation with, it was a negotiation that was happening, business negotiation, and it was like high pressure, and I was going, oh, and then I stopped and went, oh, let's just deal with it in the moment,
That's right.
and it worked. Everything fell into place. It became really easy.
It always does, man. That's the other thing I tell my boys is I I spend a lot of time. It's usually when I'm meditating, thinking about the worst times of my life
Yeah,
and how things just worked out.
yeah,
Everything is gonna work out in one way or the other. There's very few things. I mean, other than death, how
yeah.
many things don't work out? When I got divorced, I was married once before. When I got divorced at the time, I thought it was the end. That's it.
Mm,
There's nothing left for me. Blah 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 blah. And you should. I got depressed, and now I look back at it and I'm like, man, that was one of the greatest thing that happened in my life. Like I'm
mm,
super happy with my wife now. I have two additional beautiful kids. Like there's so much great things that happened out of that divorce, but at the time you couldn't see it,
yeah.
right? So
Mm, mm.
it's really interesting how, yeah, the power of now is absolutely there, and just think about those times in the past, briefly, to kind of frame what's going on in the future, but stay now because now is the only thing that matters.
I love what you said there about, this framework of being now, and think about the past and things to put that in context. Because I do that with my grandparents, because they were war refugees. So I'm descended of war refugees who came to
Yeah.
Australia after World War II. And they were separated from each other for, I think it was about 6 months or something. It was a 6-hour train trip to see each other. And back then you didn't have mobile phones. They wrote to each other. So they wrote a letter, then got a response a week later. That was the communication. And then my granddad saved up enough money to buy a block of land, built a 2-room house, not bedroom, 2 rooms. So there's a bedroom and a kitchen lounge room thing with a wood stove, dirt floor initially. And so I think about that and go, okay, my life's pretty good. Do we need to, like, for guys, do we need to have them, that context going, hey, there's a bigger picture here, focus on the now, focus on, the gratitude side of things. Do we need to have, this discussion with guys to focus on, what is it that you've actually got in your life, not what are you missing out on?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it goes back. I mean, it really does go back, because think about if someone that has never had those things to lean back and look at, someone that's had a very, let's say, worry-free life. They've had everything, and they don't have that to draw on. That's why it's so important for these kids to fail. That's why it's so important to allow these kids to feel a little bit of pain, because then they'll have that to draw on. Help them through it, help them get past it. But they need that stuff. They need to hear the stories about, how we struggled. And those stories, just like your grandparents' story, is good, but there's nothing like your own experiences, because that's the emotional side. You have no emotional connection to that 2-room house, right? Because it wasn't you that built it. It wasn't you that came over.
I grew up in it, but it was a very different house when I grew up in it.
Exactly, right? So you have no emotional connection to it. Your own life, you're going to have emotional connections to it. And I think you need that. You need that contrast in order to be the best.
What about things like, because it's banded out around a lot, and I haven't been yet to understand what it is that there's talk of toxic masculinity. And whenever I look at that and I try and find a definition of what that is, there's nothing that specifically relates to male behavior. It can be both. Is it a framework, or where do you see that?
That's another one of those woke concepts, the toxic masculinity. It has nothing to do with masculinity. It's about being a jerk, and a man or a woman could be a jerk. It upsets me. It infuriates me when I start hearing this stuff, because that's what it is. It's like, what the heck is toxic masculinity? It's just a toxic person, right?
Yeah.
That I could wrap my hands around that one more than toxic masculinity.
Yeah.
But is there toxic femininity?
No, and I think that's where, because that's where you've summed it up beautifully. It's just about being a jerk, and if it got, and do we need, from that perspective? Because it sounds like, I mean, talking with you, talking with all the people that I've been talked with so far on this, it seems to be that the main narrative is actually there's a lot of common sense out there at the moment. It's just not what's in the press. Do we need to be having more of that conversation? Because it seems I know I'm yet to meet a woman that I've heard of them, and other people have experienced, but I've yet to meet a woman that doesn't like the door being open for it. She doesn't see it as being less. It's just appreciates the courtesy. Is it a case of we need to be having more of these conversations? And as you say, like you said, you voice before we're shying away. Not saying our point. If the other person doesn't want to listen, that's fine. But we've said our point. Do we need to be bringing that back and going, yep, you might think you're woke and whatever and have this agenda, but this is my view. And I would respectfully disagree with your opinion right here. If you want to have a discussion and explore it, we can have that. But if you're going to yell and scream, I've stated my opinion, and and we need more people doing that.
You framed it perfectly. I 100% agree with everything you just said. And that's where pre-COVID, I wouldn't have had this discussion with you.
Yeah.
It's been a long time coming. That's one of the things that I keep telling myself, that there's going to be a point in my life where I really do feel I want to run for politics, and I want to hold office of some sort because of this. Because there's got to be more people like me out there that are sensible, are having these conversations, are okay to listen from the other side. And that's something that even conservatives. There's a lot of conservatives out there that are not listening to the other side. They have this steadfast belief structure, and it's like you have to be willing to have a conversation, at the very least listen with an open mind to the other side, because I've had my mind changed, and it's okay.
That's an interesting point that you've said there, that you've had your mind changed, and that's part of what listening and growth is, isn't it? If you don't have your mind changed, how can you grow?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, environmentally, for instance, that's one of the hot topics. Is I used to be a completely different person when it comes to the environment than I am today.
Mm,
Am I an extreme lefty tree hugger? No. But I am no longer one person that says, let's not do anything about it. Mother Earth can kind of take care of herself. And that's because I've listened to the other side. I've listened to the data, and I'm okay with. I wasn't 100% right with what I was thinking when I was younger.
mm.
Um, but at the same time, I'm not also one of those people that's going to turn away from petroleum and say, we've got to go to all electric tomorrow.
Is that part of this framework of you're saying it's being okay with not being right? Is that something we need to add into that? It's in which that's a hard thing to
Going back
do, I
to the
think, for a lot of
failure discussion, I mean, it's going
yeah.
back to the failure discussion. I mean, not being right is having a sense of failure, right? Because you had this opinion that you
Mm,
defended with everything that you are, and all of a
yeah,
sudden it's like, oh, maybe I wasn't right. And
yeah.
I think that's okay, as long as you're open minded about it. You're not a flag in the wind that you're changing. That's the other thing that a lot of these politicians. It's like if they're talking to person A, they have person A's opinion, and they're talking to person B, they have person B's opinion.
Mm,
You have to have an opinion, and you have to have that opinion based in some sort of factual conclusions. But the facts, over time change. Knowledge changes, things change.
mm.
You get more information, then your opinion may change with the information that you're given.
I love it because Einstein said that. Well, I read. Oh, I wasn't there, but I read the story of he gave the people. He was handing out the tests, and the assistant said, "But you gave them that test last time," and he said, "Yeah, but the answers have changed."
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. I know that story. That's really funny. How do the answers change? Well, information changes.
exactly. It's a very valid point. We've talked for a while. I've actually lost track of time, but this has been lots of fun. But it seems really refreshing having this conversation. It seems to be a lot of common sense out there, and that we can have these conversations if we do things. Teaching guys, be respectful, both of yourself and of other people. Be open to listening. Be sure of who you are. Do the right things. They all seem like global things that are fairly well. When you say them, they're easy, and it's just a matter of practicing and doing it. Is that what we need to be doing?
Yeah, absolutely. And I really do feel that it's coming around. I think that there's more people that are talking. We have to speak out in a respectful manner. And as long as we start talking with each other, I think our message is going to start to get heard.
Yeah. So maybe next time we watch our politics, because it's the same here. When the next time the debate comes on, we all just turn it off.
Yeah.
They'll get the message.
The problem is that we still have to vote. That's the
Well, that
problem.
was
Like you have these
facetiously, that's
choices. You
what
still
Billy
have to
Connolly.
vote.
I mean, the comedian Billy Connolly.
Uh-huh.
I remember once he said, "Don't vote. You're only encouraging the bastards."
Yeah. I wish it was that easy. That's one of the things. Politics is going to take a
Mm,
lifetime, if not multiple lifetimes, to fix. Unfortunately, because it's a morale driven thing, and I think that there's a lot of politicians out there that think they're doing the right thing. I think there's
I
very
think
few.
intentions there.
Yeah, I think
It's
it's
just
good
how.
intention.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's how they're going about it. I don't know.
I love
I
Jim Rohn said about that. He said, politics, poly coming from the Greek many, ticks are blood sucking parasites.
yeah, yeah,
And I can quote
that's
that.
so true.
I know we're saying that facetiously. We do need leadership, and and I think government is very important. It's just how the people behave within that government. Um,
Yeah, I mean, we're also very lucky. In the States, Australia,
mm,
we've got decent governments. There's a lot of other governments out there that are way worse. So it's we just got
yeah.
to keep them honest as best we can. That's all.
And maybe that's what we need from that ground up level is we as people have these conversations about this is what leadership is. This is what we're expecting of you, to be respectful, to behave in that manner, and through that, this what is manly. We'll have more of those gentleman leaders. And not to say there won't be women, there'll be women leaders as well, but we're talking in the framework of what is manly.
But they got to be held to the same standard. I mean,
Yeah.
with gentlemen or women, they have a similar standard, right?
Yeah, cool. Victor, it has been such a pleasure chatting with you as always. It's so exciting to hear again your perspective, and someone like you said, you've come out again, said this is how it is, and I love your opinion. So thank you for sharing.
Oh, it was awesome having this. Is a great show. Thank you very much for having me once again. I had a lot of fun.
Thank you for being part of the Share.Care community and helping people around the world prosper. You're creating a bigger pie for everyone to share. The more people contributing to the world being a better place, the better the world becomes, for others and for you.